Civic Research Institute's Free City Center. Today we're at Dignity Moves in San Francisco, where we're going to learn about some really innovative approaches for helping get people off of the streets and into shelter and on their way out of homelessness.
City College building. It has two odd-shaped little triangle parking lots on both sides. Upper lot, and there's a lower one that we'll show you. And the developer that's going to be converting it into housing is still in the process of doing the permits and the entitlements and figuring out their financing. They're going to tear this down and use this whole space to be housing. It'll take a while. And there's a lot of that here. There's a lot of that in our, in the country where somebody has got a piece of land. They've got something planned for it.
Right.
And there's a period of time in which it is being wasted. It's being squandered. And so, that's a really valuable asset for that time period that's available. And so we can swoop in and keep it busy, do something with it in the meantime, and then just literally pick up and leave. And so the whole idea is to turn sort of a squandered asset of a few years that the land is vacant into the thing we need most, which is housing.
Housing. So, if it weren't for you, this would just be an empty parking lot.
They're just parking lots. In fact, this parking lot, the city had rented it from the owner during COVID for tents. So it was a safe sleeping site. So we came in and moved the tents aside, built the first half of the rooms, let everybody move in, and then built the rest of them. So therefore it was done in 2 stages, but we started in January last year and the first half of them moved in March 6th. So 2 months later. And then the other half moved in a month and a half after that. So it would have been done even faster, but we wanted to keep people here and then let them move right from the tent. Yeah. Right. So there were 44 tents, and now we've upgraded it to 70 cabins. So there are 94 or so people living here, because some of them are couples, about 7 dogs, a couple cats, which is one of the nice things about a private room is that you can bring your pet and trust that it's going to be safe.
Right.
And
that's an issue for a lot of people, right? You can't bring, if you have a dog, if you have a cat, you can't bring it.
Some shelters are starting to get smarter about that and realize that if somebody's not allowed to bring their pet, they're not gonna go, right? They're not gonna lose the only loved one they have in their life. So more and more shelters are starting to allow pets, but it's still not great. I mean, you've got your pet in a public place with bunk beds, got another pet there, they may not get along. Yeah. I mean, you gotta have a place for the dog can be closed, but think about also being with your partner, right? That's still a human thing, which is have privacy with one you love, not even that bunk bed. Right. And so having your own private room really a game changer in terms of people being willing to come. We're told that when the outreach people will go out to an encampment and offer somebody a bunk bed, do it 2 or 3 times, and then they're lucky if 1 out of 10 will take it. And nobody has turned us down yet, to my knowledge.
Really? So the first time they go out?
Yes. And in fact, to the contrary, we get people showing up begging, saying, please can I have one of those? Please can I have one of those? You don't see that in the group shelters. So we really know that it's the fundamental thing that changes it is people are willing to come and take placement and get settled if they can have a private room. And so why not, right? And in fact,
it's cheaper than shelter, right?
That's the thing, is you take the Navigation Center's budget, construction costs, and divide it by the number of cots, these are less than half.
So these are less than half the cost of a cot.
Yep. If you look at the public data that's in the newspaper, $94 million to build one or something, you divide it by the number of cots, it worked out to $63,000 for one of them and $92 or something for the other. These are $34,000 per room. And they're good for 20 years, plus or minus. I mean, the stuff itself is really durable. And then you can see there's a place that you can pick it up with a forklift and literally put it on a truck, move it to the next place.
So if this is where you need assistance originally, you set up here, you help the community, hopefully you transition people to where they need to be, and then we need to go to a different community.
And when they need their land back, give me a call, we'll move it down the street to the next parking lot. And the idea is, of course, that once you have a system going, you have, a dozen of these around a city, and it's kind of hopscotch, right? You move around between vacant lot and vacant lot. But even with the landowners that say, I don't know how long my entitlement is going to take, so I don't want to commit, give me 3 months notice. Let me use it on a rolling, right? It doesn't take a lot of longer to disassemble. What takes longer, of course, is to figure out where the people are going to go next. But interim housing is not intended to be a long-term stay, right? It's an alternative to shelter. It's different from shelter in a lot of ways. So shelter, the stereotype we have of shelter is you walk up, you stand in line, right? You get a bed, you hope, and then the next morning you have to leave, stand in line again. All sorts of things wrong with that. This is you're referred in, you have to be assessed by the coordinated system, and you get referred here. There's no walk-ups, and you're here for 6 months, 12 months, maybe 2 years, as long as it takes for the next exit to be figured out and arranged. And so it's really a place where you're stable.
So this is a temporary place where people can get stability in their lives, live in a humane way, have access to facilities, their own room, and then the goal is treatment, whatever that treatment may be, whether it's economic training.
Yeah.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
well, I think about it this way. So in our system today, when a person becomes homeless, they get registered, they get waited on a waiting list for government housing, and their only alternative is a group shelter, right? And so they wait, and when they first became homeless, the vast majority would still, the vast majority do not yet have a debilitating enough mental or behavioral health problem that would prevent them from returning back to stability when they first become homeless. Some do. They've all had trauma.
Right.
They've all gone through rough times. They all need a deep breath and a place to chill and a place to rebuild. But they have the possibility of returning to self-sufficiency of some sort. However, struggling on the streets, 30 days later, half as many would be able to return to self-sufficiency. The average wait time in San Francisco is 14 years. So by the time you've waited 14 years, of course you're going to be on government-funded housing, right? And a whole lot of mental and behavioral health care and physical health, the debilitation that happens from struggling on the streets, it sets in fast. And so if we've got a system today where the only exit is that permanent housing that the government is funding, on average across California, that's costing us about $650,000 per room. In San Francisco and our bigger cities like Los Angeles, it's over $1 million per room right now. And it takes 5 years at best to build one of those houses. So for every one person who's finally getting placed in that permanent housing, 4 are falling into homelessness. So if you look at that system, 1 is going out, 4 are coming in, and the chances of those 4 returning to self-sufficiency from the street are very minimal. How are you going to plug in your cell phone? Do you even apply for a job? Where are you going to shower, right? And so the system's going to break. I mean, it's just the logic. That's not going to work unless there's another place for that pressure valve to open. So the idea is here, if we can get people indoors early, let them take a deep breath and work on other exits. It's a pivot. So what we've done is we contract with different manufacturers depending on, just buying a widget. This particular one is one that we like a lot. It's made of panels, as you can see. So these panels come flat pack, kind of like IKEA, and you assemble them here in the steel frames. And these particular rooms are 64 square feet each, but there's nothing that says you don't add another panel and make them 85 square feet or whatever. You can make them bigger for couples, bigger for families. So the units themselves, the materials are about $10,000 per room. But then obviously, skilled labor. We use union labor and of course and so forth. We pay prevailing wage.
I got misplaced for reasons. I fell through the cracks. I got addicted when I was trying to return it. Many times I became homeless. I've never lived like that before. I've watched people do it. I used to help. I used to the street team and help people homeless and pass out care packages. But this place is a blessing to a lot of people because you gotta have somewhere to go where you have peace of mind. When you lock out the door, figure out what you're gonna do. And let me tell you, it's so much easier to move on with your life. It's not worried where to take a shower, where your next meal is, where you're going to your head. When you have those 3 things, you can succeed. Without them, it's really hard.
So this was a safe sleeping site before. The city was using it to have people in tents. And so the porta potties and the trailer showers were already here. When we do this normally, we use a shipping container size building that we have retrofitted with bathroom, shower stalls, and also a little laundry.
Right.
Therefore, you only have one main water sewer hookup on the site that you have to do, and you can unscrew it, take it with you when you move to the next place. The whole idea is to invest as little as possible in the ground, so that when you're moving them, the project budget is the units themselves. So we didn't invest in things that now, in retrospect, I wish I had. For instance, the bathroom buildings, but also the fence. And forward in Santa Barbara, we have a beautiful stucco wall that has a wooden arched gate. That the radius of the arch was designated by the Santa Barbara Historical Society to be the proper shape and the proper color of terracotta.
Right.
You go next door to Morgan Stanley's private client services, and you would not know. We need for the community to want to have these in their community rather than the other way around and be opposed, right? And I understand where not in my backyard comes from, but we can get over that fast if we explain it better. So the not in my backyard shelter idea is they're standing in line, they get kicked back out in the morning, they have no place to go until it's time to go at night, they're loitering around. Of course you don't want that in your neighborhood. But with this, if you think about it, if those people are already sleeping on these parking lots, right? And so people say, oh, it's next to a school, you can't put a shelter there. Well, think about it, they're already there, but they're hungry, they're disgruntled, they haven't slept more than an hour or two at night, right? They're probably not on meds and nobody's watching them. Or you could have those same people behind a beautiful gate with 24/7 staffing and a proper bed and 3 meals a day, which is safer, right? There's a woman here who told me her story. She was in a violent relationship, which unfortunately domestic violence survivors are a disproportionate percent of the people on the streets, because a husband has, by definition, cut you off from your support system, right? All these things. She became homeless. She really had nobody to call and nowhere to go. She was not going to go to a group shelter for very good reasons. Women are 3 times as likely to be sexually assaulted in a group shelter than they are on the streets, right? And she said the first night, she was desperate to not fall asleep. She was too scared, and the feet shuffling by, so she drank all the coffee she could. She fell asleep anyway. She woke up the next morning, she said, I'd never done drugs in my life. I went straight to the Tenderloin and started asking around for this thing they call meth, because I did not want to fall asleep the next night. She made a conscious choice, and she finally got here, and 5 years later, she's indoors, she's got her 30-day NA chip, she got connected to a doctor for a prescription of methadone, and she's trying to kick it. But if she'd had a place to lock her door and be safe, she could have prevented all of that.
I lost my job at the start of COVID. I had a good construction job, and me and my baby's mom broke up, and I couldn't stand being around in the same town that they were in, because she started dating my old best friends and stuff, and so I thought I'd travel around, and ended up here, and this is not a good place. Slept in the uni staircases at night, and so and they really, like, you not feeling safe is a huge thing. Like, you see people falling asleep on the bus, and it's because, like, that's the only time when they feel like slightly safe,
Yeah.
like that's a real thing. Like
Wow.
every single night, like, I would practically spend, like, walking around, like, and every time I'd stop and sat somewhere, I wouldn't feel like safe.
Yeah. We started this group with a group of members from Young Presidents Organization, YPO, who are all CEOs and presidents, very private sector thinking. And we didn't intend to start a nonprofit. We were really coming together as a working group to analyze and understand, because it is a head scratcher. We keep spending more and more money, and the problem keeps getting worse. How is that possible, right? So we started to look into it, and when you look at it from an analytical perspective, where you let go of all the idealism and all of the everything and just fresh look, the system looks like this. When somebody becomes homeless, they can get a bunk bed in a group shelter, and there are not even enough of those, and there's no other alternative until they can get placed on permanent housing of some sort. The cities have enormous budgets that are growing, but they're spending them all on permanent supportive housing, for the mostly all. And the problem with that permanent supportive housing is that it is costing $650,000 per unit on average in California. And in big cities, San Francisco and Los Angeles, it can be over $1 million per unit, right? And it takes 5 years, maybe 7 years to get permitted. That's if you're not getting neighborhood opposition. So the system looks like this. For every one person who finally gets that permanent supportive housing, 4 are falling into homelessness. Think about, you're going into a pipe, and 1 goes out and 4 go in, and there aren't any outlets to the pipe other than that. Of course it's going to break, right? It's just simple physics. And so today cities are saying that permanent housing is getting more and more expensive, so we got to try harder. Taking a fresh look and going, wait a minute, you can try to get those costs from 650 to 350. You're still having the wrong ratios. So looking at it simplistically, the first thing you do is stop the inflow. And experts say, and I agree, that the best use of dollars in the homeless system is prevention. Those are the most bang for your buck. But when somebody becomes homeless, when they first become homeless, less than 20% on that day have a debilitating enough mental or behavioral health problem that would prevent them from returning to self-sufficiency. They were self-sufficient yesterday. They have certainly gone through trauma. They definitely need to regroup. They need to take a deep breath. In fact, my dad said I should name this organization A Deep Breath because it's what it is, right? But now let's not start with the assumption that they are destined for welfare housing for the rest of their lives. This is a stop valve with lots of exits. You come in and you take your deep breath and you start thinking about other exits. And at that moment, if we can get you indoors early enough, before you've had too many cold nights and you say yes to the drug dealer, if we can get you indoors, plug in your cell phone, a shower, let's do everything we can with the full expectation that you're going to return to self-sufficiency or other avenues of stability. Certainly, some of them can't. Schizophrenia runs in the poor and the homeless just like it does with the wealthy. That's what society is for. There will be some who aren't going to be able to take care of themselves. That's fine. We've identified that, and we can start dealing with it for what it is. It's a sorting mechanism, right? And so if you think about that, the problem is that when people go from the streets into shelter or this housing, they're still homeless, right? They're just sheltered homeless. And correctly, our governments have decided that the only exit out of homelessness is permanent housing. They're right, it is. When you are in permanent housing, you are no longer homeless. But if you don't have an alternative in the meantime, then the longer you stay on those streets, you're more and more certain to be in permanent housing. So we believe from a systems level, investing in this stop valve makes a lot of sense.
The private sector,
Yes.
the ability to turn on a dime, the ability to be responsive, the ability, we were talking earlier about the idea that the government homeless infrastructure, one, it's understaffed, and two, they have their metrics,
Right.
and they're bound by their metrics. You, as a private organization, you guys
We're not, right.
So you can be innovative.
Think at that. And Supervisor Mandelman posed the question and unanimously approved by the supervisors as a whole, that ordered the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing to assess what it would take to have shelter for all in San Francisco. And ask them to do it, just said, report back on what it would look like to have a place for everybody who's on our streets today. So the Department of Homelessness dutifully responded and wrote their report, and was issued in December, that essentially said, I'm sorry, we won't answer the question because it's not possible. And Supervisor Mandelman had his hearing in the spring, and he, in a loud voice, drove home the point that said, I didn't ask you if it was possible. I asked you what it would take. And we as the private sector have it in our heads that government is responsible for homelessness, and our job is to sit here and complain that they don't do it well enough, right? We all have a stake in this. And so after the Department of Homelessness issued their report, and they didn't really say it wasn't possible, they just quoted some very large numbers that were way larger than their budget. So we started thinking, well, let's answer that question ourselves. What would it take? And it's actually quite simple. You look at how many people are unsheltered as of the last point in time count, which is 4,700. You need 60% is the number of units and beds you need to build. So that's about 2,500 beds that you need. Ironically, that's actually the same number that HSH cited is how many they would need. So they checked my math, 2,500. Then you look at a map of the city of San Francisco and you put on polka dots of all the vacant land that's out there. Really important that it's polka dots, that it is distributed across the city, because what we have found is that one little initiative here or one little initiative there gets so much complaint and resistance that it never get off the ground. But if you look at it holistically and say, okay, we need 30 vacant parking lots to do 2,500 beds. But you look at how much permanent supportive housing is coming online, and there are a few thousand units coming in the next few years. So 2,500 a day, 2 years from now, you might need 2,000 units. And a few years later, you might need fewer and fewer. As you work through that inventory, the interim housing we're going to need is going to be smaller and smaller amounts. And so if that site up there on Nob Hill, the developer is going to be breaking ground in 2 years, that's one of the ones that'll just be 2 years. This guy is waiting for high-speed rail to come. That one might be here a little bit longer, right? And so you can map it out and spread this around the city. And then if you build cabins like this, the total is about $170 million to build and construct enough private, dignified housing for everyone on the streets in San Francisco. Currently, the city's spending about $600 million per year. But that's because that permanent housing is expensive, and they should, right? And so that's very, very doable. It's doable by the private sector because the private sector can move fast. The only thing that's missing is if I could convince people that when you add them all up together, it solves the problem, solves it, gets everyone indoors, not just 30 people. Now all of a sudden, all these things get funded, right? And so the first thing we do is we figure out who else has got initiatives going, and some of them may be a high-rise building, some of them maybe, doesn't matter. These cabins can fill in the gaps where there aren't enough. This is only one solution. You're gonna have some folks formerly incarcerated who don't want walls yet. That's fine. One of the sites can be safe sleeping with tents. They get over that fast generally, but the first 6 months, people coming out of prison, I respect that, right? So there can be all sorts of different flavors. And the ones that are only gonna be needed for 2 years, you use pallet, which is, very fast and not intended to be a long-term solution, but for a year or two, great. We're also ultimately gonna always need some interim housing, so that should be the hotels and be permanent, right? So there's kind of a whole range. But the thing that I've started to understand, and the not in my backyard pushback from neighbors, comes from two things. First of all, the city announcing, we're going to build something on Mission Street. Of course the neighbors, like, what? Why me, right? And so the vision for this is that you take the 38 neighborhood districts in San Francisco, say Pacific Heights, and you empower them to solve their problem the way they want to. And when I say empower them, we have to think very, very specifically within the framework of Martin versus Boise. And to be able to make it illegal to sleep on the streets.
Martin versus Boise is the lawsuit that says that if there's not an available bed, you can't enforce no camping laws.
It's very logical. The Supreme Court has said you should not be able to arrest somebody for doing something they can't avoid. That is basic, fundamental, cruel and unusual punishment. And so it was upheld by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that some homeless advocates sued the city of Boise and said you should not be allowed to arrest them for sleeping on the streets if they don't have an alternative. So that is applicable to the states that are within, California being one of them, within the Ninth Circuit. And so the problem is, so San Francisco will go out to an encampment and say you can't camp here. They can't arrest them for it, but they'll move them down the street. Sweep them down the street. Okay, whatever that cost was wasted money, right? So what I want to do is turn that concept from a stick, you can't do it, into a carrot that says you can enforce that your neighborhood is a no camping ordinance because you did offer everyone a bed. And by the way, a dignified one, right? And so the idea would be neighborhood by neighborhood to go to Pacific Heights and say you've got 100 people sleeping on your streets. The math says and the law says, therefore you need to build 60 rooms. I can help you get some ideas, like that Catholic church over there is a really big parking lot and I've never seen more than 5 cars in it. But you guys do it where you want to. If you come together, and there are ways we're gonna help, and build those 60 beds, you make valid offers of shelter to everyone who's there. It is going to be posted and it is going to be enforced. No sleeping on the streets in Pacific Heights. You're well within your rights to do that. And I can assure you the cities and everybody would love to enforce those camping laws, but they can't do it and they shouldn't do it unless they've got a valid place to offer somebody. So if you empower the neighborhood associations, they can decide what color and the archway, they can decide who's the general contractor, they can decide a whole lot of stuff. They have to have made a valid offer to 60 people. So that's the way we intend to set this up. And there's a lot more we can do for those neighborhood associations than just that. First, obviously, we can start with suggestions of vacant land. We will do a lot of that. But we can also help with funding in some very interesting ways, which is that today, let's take Blue Shield Foundation. They want to fund programs for domestic violence survivors. Here at 33 Golf, we might have 2 or 3 out of 95. So they're not going to fund this. What if we created a site dedicated for domestic violence survivors? Now, all of a sudden, I've unlocked money that wasn't there before. The Veterans Association has a lot of money to go toward housing veterans, as they should. They should have a veterans site, or at least veterans designated beds. What about LGBTQ? There's a lot of money to make sure that those folks were unfortunately very disproportionately represented in homelessness. So if you start to segment, and then job seekers, LinkedIn should have resume writers at the job seekers site, and it shouldn't be next to the people who are chronically addicted to meth, right? So if you segment it out, and then the other one becomes the Salvation Army. Those beds are conditional on sobriety. Housing First says that you cannot make housing a condition, sobriety a condition for housing. Well, if we had 3 or 4 options, that could count towards this solution because somebody could opt into the sober bed. And I think there are a lot of folks who would like to opt in, but the government can't fund Salvation Army because it's conditional. That's only because that's the only offer that the person has. Here's the problem that we've dealt with more and more as we're seeing it, which is, let's say in a city we find a piece of land that's got enough rooms for 100 people. And we have philanthropy that says, we'll build 100 rooms. I'm sorry to say, you still have a city say, no thank you, we'll only take 30. What? You're gonna leave 70 still on the street? Yes, because when they're on the street, it's not coming out of my budget. When I get them indoors, I'm now responsible for 3 meals a day and to keep them safe and security. I only want them indoors if I've got a clear line of sight for where they're going next. If I've got 30 apartments coming online, I'll take 30 now because I know I'm not going to be responsible for caring for them indefinitely. They wouldn't say it this way, but that translates to, I'd rather 70 be on the streets than be indoors because it's costing the hospital and probation and everybody else, not my apartment. I'm so not okay with that, and I don't think anyone is if they think about it that way. We have the most to lose from people sleeping in front of my restaurant. We, private sector. Let's pool together ourselves, get everybody indoors, and then let the government catch up with the permanent housing, which is what they do best. And it needs government to build that permanent housing. $800,000, you're not going to have philanthropy do that. Right?
Well, but it seems to me that you won't need nearly as much permanent housing because you're going to be able to transfer, especially in the future, you're transferring people, getting them sustainable, getting somebody back into kind of where they want to be, a much more humane outcome where I have a family, I have a home, I have a job, I'm working towards my goals of fulfilling life. That's, from a human perspective, that's what we want to achieve.
Yes.
And you're better positioned to do that. Permanent housing isn't.
They're still going to need permanent housing. They're going to need permanent affordable housing rather than supportive housing.
And that's regulations of building. That's you don't much supply and demand. Why? Housing's unaffordable because you can't build, and when you do build, we inflate the cost.
Yes.
We can address that. That's a very different problem.
Somebody else needs to do that, and I want to be clear. Getting people into interim housing does not solve homelessness. It is one piece of a much more complex problem, including housing costs. And people much smarter than me need to do that. And racial equity issues and drug crises, all those things are part of this jigsaw puzzle. Getting people indoors and off of the streets is only one component. I believe that you pick, each person and each team picks one component. We can't do it all. All Home is a really great analysis group that the experts on these things has written a really excellent report that calls for a ratio of 1 to 2 to 4 for homelessness resources. 1 unit of interim for 2 units of permanent for 4 of prevention. Dignity Moves and this Dignity Now initiative is addressing the 1. Does not mean 2 and 4 are any less important. Those are for somebody else to do. But addressing interim housing and unsheltered, it is the most inhumane, the most visible, and ironically, the one that is the easiest to solve. Now, okay again to enforce anti-camping laws, provided that you have made valid offers and so forth. The emergency building codes are still in effect that allow us to do these really quickly. All of the pieces necessary to get this done and to end unsheltered homelessness in the city are aligned. And the most important is that the level of energy and anger has hit a boiling point. There's so much electricity in this air that is frustrated about homelessness, and it can go one of 2 places. It can go leave the town, which a lot of people are doing. It can create a lot of anger and frustration. If we could direct it with a lightning rod and point it towards a solution, man, there's a lot of energy out there to do it. But people don't want to do it if they don't believe it will actually make a difference and solve the problem. If we can show that it does, I think it's a game changer.